and decreasing cortisol, which is connected with stress, right? So basically, you're decreasing the stress and you're kind of increasing your dominance as such. So, in scientific terms, if you can achieve these hormone levels, then you're biologically primed to be more assertive, confident, and maybe even more relaxed as such, right? So when we act confident by assuming these postures, it tends to kind of help us to feel more confident, right? So it's more about the feel factor that really comes into play. So because nonverbal behaviors are incredibly important signifiers and communication vehicles, they influence interferences that people, kind of make about us, right? So power poses or postural feedback is a technique that suggests how you hold your body, influences how you feel and how you behave. So basically, however you kind of carry yourself will influence how you're actually feeling and how you will behave in connection to that. So changes in hormones, for example, that were found to be associated with power posing in the original study that was actually done years back were not found in a later on study, right? So there are differences that have been found across various studies, but all in all, the consensus is that it definitely helps to feel much more confident because of the fact that it kind of makes you feel more confident and leads to like a better performance and a more relaxed state. So I think there are two types, two types of power poses that we can talk about. So the first one is the power pose when you stand like a Superman pose, just with your hands across your waist. So, this is, coaches and, like even athletes can teach themselves how to work on, standing for like 20 seconds in a power pose, have more awareness of their body language, walk tall with confidence. So all of this will basically make you feel much differently than you are initially feeling, which in turn will kind of change your actual state of mind that you're going through. So that's the whole ideology behind the power pose.
Thanks, Maithili. We have another question from Ditoso to Peter. Peter, could you please unmute yourself and ask question directly to Maithili? Peter, can you hear me? I think he'll be having some connection issues. He's asking, how should we keep balance between confidence and overconfidence?
Right. So when we talk about overconfidence, it's basically when an athlete has way too much belief about his or her or capabilities about what they can do, right? So it's basically when the athlete is probably crossing the line about his or her own belief. So to draw this balance, I think there needs to be a very it needs to be a very tuned discussion about realistic goals and realistic performance in terms of, as a coach, how can you help them do that. So you can have timely discussions set with the athlete as to what you expect from the athlete in terms of performance, timing, any of that. And also when they go for events or competition, you kind of want to give them a reality check sometimes. So it's not always right that you say that, oh, you are the best, or you are always going to win. So these kind of false statements, or overdoing the positive self-talk, is also not very beneficial because it can lead to overconfidence. So I think here it's all about finding the realistic conversations with your athletes. Realistic goal setting is very important, so the athlete also knows that what he's aiming for. If he sets really unrealistic goals for himself or herself, then he's going to feel that, oh, I can achieve so much, when it's not actually physically possible. So I think you need to kind of have these conversations with your athletes in a very timely process, so that they don't get overconfident, or that they don't feel extra good about themselves, which could also be harmful in such situations. So yeah, timely goals, realistic goals, and important discussions with your athletes.
Thank you very much for that, Maithili. Now, that was the last question, Maithili. Now we are moving on to James.
Thank you.
James, yeah, thanks, Maithili. Over to you, James.
Thank you very much, Ajit. So the first of the presentations that I did was teaching hurdles to a beginner in just 30 minutes. And we talked a little bit about, heredity and environment, so what it takes to be a good hurdler, the environment that you grow up in and how that helps you develop as a hurdler. We also talked about ways of learning a skill. We talked about three things: cognitive learning, which is about thinking; affective learning, which is more about emotions and feelings; and then kinesthetic learning, which is about skill-based and actually learning by doing. We looked at what it takes to be a successful hurdler. We looked at developing young hurdlers. And then we based ourselves on three main philosophies: one of rhythm, efficiency, and momentum, and how those three things are interrelated. Then we talked about how we started an athlete hurdling. So from someone that's never done any hurdling at all to someone that can now hurdle efficiently and competently with 3 steps in between. And if you remember, the way we did that was by setting up 3 different lanes of hurdles, different distances apart. And once the athlete could do 3 steps in between the hurdles in the first lane, we would then move them across to the next lane, which had a slightly different or longer distance in between the hurdles. And we focused on the running in between rather than the hurdling itself. So we were trying to develop the rhythm, the running rhythm of the athletes in between the hurdles rather than the hurdle clearance. We then looked at all the equipment that we need to be a hurdler. And we also talked about how we can make hurdles from plastic piping and using sticks and bamboo sticks and stuff like that, and being very creative and innovative in how we make hurdles if we don't have specific hurdles ourselves. We then looked at all the hurdle distances and the spacings for the different age groups. And then we looked at all the 5 steps of developing a sprint hurdler. So a sort of a sequence of 5 easy steps to start somebody off from having never hurdled to competently hurdling in a very short period of time. Then we delved into a little bit more the technical side, and we looked at the start into the first hurdle, getting that correct. And then we finally looked at some of the clearance, some of the things that are required for good hurdle clearance. Of course, hurdles is not just sprint hurdles. So we also looked at 400-meter hurdling and how we develop a 400-meter hurdler. And we specifically talked about hurdling off both legs, so teaching the hurdler to lead with the right and the left leg. And we also looked at hurdling on a bend, because obviously in a 400-meter hurdles race, half of the race is on the bend. And then we finished with some examples of some training sessions that you can do yourself as athletes, or as coaches you can deliver for your athletes. Happy to answer any further questions that I wasn't able to answer when I did the presentation.
Thanks, James. We have a question from Srijit Prashant Karle. Srijit, could you please unmute yourself and ask the question to James? Srijit, can you hear me? James basically is asking how is rhythm, why rhythm is very important in hurdling.
Yeah, I mean, rhythm is incredibly important in hurdling. And the main reason it's important is because in hurdling, you have a series of constants, and the constants are the hurdles. So the hurdles are always in the same place. They're the same for everybody. They're the same height, same distance apart. So therefore, it's important that you establish a very effective and efficient running rhythm in between the hurdles. Now, if you develop that rhythm, you will become more efficient. And if you become more efficient, you'll have more energy to complete the race, particularly at the end of the race. And if you have more rhythm, you'll also be able to develop or minimize the loss of momentum of the hurdles. When you take a hurdle, in essence, what happens is you slow down, you decelerate. And when you land off the hurdle, you then re-accelerate. So hurdling is a series of deceleration and accelerations. So if you have good rhythm, you'll minimize this speed loss. You'll be more efficient, and ultimately, you will be faster. And that's why rhythm is extremely important in hurdling, and that's why running rhythm in particular should be the first thing that you teach when you're starting with new hurdlers.
Thanks, James. Nuthan has a question. Nuthan, can you unmute yourself and ask a question? Nuthan, can you hear me? Oh, okay. I think he's not having that option to unmute himself. Okay, fine. He's asking how many sessions in a week young athletes should be having to teach her. So, like, how many sessions would you plan if you need to teach a young athletes? How many sessions in a week will you be planning?
Yeah, this is a really good question, and I get asked this a lot. It's very hard to give an exact answer. It would depend on the specific age and also the experience of the athlete. How many years they've been doing athletics and how many years they've been hurdling. Normally, you tend to do more hurdling the older the athlete gets, and as the athlete gets more specialized in hurdling. As a young athlete, we would always recommend following the long-term athlete development pathway or guidance from the long-term athlete development pathway. And what that suggests is with young athletes, we should follow a multi-events background. Therefore, the athlete should be doing not just hurdling, but also sprinting, jumping, perhaps throwing. And they should also be working on good movement, good technical competence, and things like coordination and some fundamental strength development also. So you need to factor all these things in. And what you also might want to do with young athletes is you might want to do perhaps some hurdling and also another event on the same day. So, for example, hurdling and long jump go well together because the takeoff is very similar. And hurdling can also be used as very effective coordination work. So you can, when you're working on coordination, you can use the hurdles to help with that also. So I don't really have an exact answer, but I think young athletes can be hurdling maybe twice per week. But I would also recommend they're doing other events and working on good quality movement, good quality technique. And remember, when you're doing hurdling with young athletes, what are you trying to achieve? Well, you're trying to achieve a fast 3-stride running rhythm for sprint hurdlers. And for 400-meter hurdlers, we're trying to develop the ability to hurdle off both legs and to hurdle off a bend and minimize the loss of momentum over the hurdles. So as long as you have those as your guiding principles, your guiding philosophies, then that gives you some structure for your hurdle sessions.
Thanks, James. Nithan again has a question. In your presentation, you said the hurdlers, while clearing the hurdles, should be the height of the level of the head should be the same as in between the hurdles as well. So how do you teach athletes how to keep that level height? Because generally young athletes, when they start learning hurdle, they start jumping over the hurdles. Obviously, it's kind of jump, run, jump, run. So obviously the height of the head, the level of the head will be going above than the normal one. Is there a cue which can be taught or used by the coaches to teach athletes to keep that level all the time same?
Yeah. So I mean, the first thing you can do is you can everyone has mobile phones nowadays. So a good starting point is to film your athlete from the side. So you pan across maybe 2 or 3 hurdles, and hopefully in the background you'll have some sort of reference point. Maybe if you're lucky enough to be in a stadium that has seating, maybe there's a row of seats. If you're not so lucky and you're on a mud track or something, maybe there's a hedgerow or a fence or something in the background that you can use as a reference. And then you can see what is happening to the head when the athletes are taking a hurdle. Now, if the head is going up, then what that means is the athlete is jumping the hurdles. Then you can start analyzing why they are jumping the hurdles. Now, the majority of the time, they jump the hurdles because they're too close to the hurdle and they're actually jumping it. Now, you don't want to jump a hurdle. You just want to take the hurdle like a long stride, like a powerful stride. So you can then show the athletes, look, you're in too close, therefore you're jumping the hurdle, and look, your head is going up as you go over the hurdle. And you can encourage them to try and keep the head at the same height all the way by taking off further away from the hurdle. And what you can do is you can actually maybe, as the coach, look at where they're taking off and then maybe put a marker a little bit further away from the hurdle to give them something to look at and to regulate to. So encourage them to take off further away from the hurdle. And then they hopefully will feel that. They'll feel the difference of taking off further away. And that will help them take the hurdle better. And then, of course, as a product of that, what you will then find is when you refilm the athlete, that now hopefully the head will be in line or will be the same height all the way across the run. So I hope that makes sense.
Sure, James. Yeah, thanks for that, James. Srijit is asking a question again. He's asking, is hurdling is good for stability? In a way, I think he's asking, is it, if you teach the athletes hurdling, is it good enough to improve their stability itself, or should we do a separate exercises or workouts to improve their stability?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it's a question that it can be expanded even more than this, more than just stability. So there's a whole host of things that you can learn and develop through hurdling. And remember, you can do hurdling in training and not necessarily compete at the hurdles. So you don't need to necessarily compete in the hurdles if you are not confident enough or you're not experienced enough or something. But you can still do hurdling in training, and you get a huge number of benefits. Yes, it will help with your stability, your strength, coordination, timing, plyometric ability, flexibility, all these type of things you can get a huge benefit from hurdling. So I would advocate that all young athletes hurdle, every single one, even if they're a long distance runner, they should be hurdling. For long distance, maybe eventually they could be steeplechase athletes. Therefore, they need to learn how to hurdle. Sprinters could be hurdlers, or 400-meter runners could be 400-meter hurdlers later in their careers. It's very difficult when the athletes are young to know exactly which event they're going to end up doing. So give them the options, teach them how to hurdle, get the athletes hurdling, and you'll get huge benefits outside of just becoming a better hurdler. So in answer to your question, yes, it's very good for developing strength and stability work, as well as a huge number of other benefits.
Thank you, James. That was your last question. Can we move on to your next session?
Sure. So the next presentation that I did was 400-meter training for young athletes, and I was really looking at athletes between the ages of 14 and 18. So some of the things we talked about in the presentation were some of the qualities required to be a good 400-meter athlete. We talked about a good efficient runner. We talked about good height, natural height, good speed, good running economy and efficiency. We talked about the 3 different types of 400-meter athletes: strength-based, speed-based, rhythm-based 400-meter runners. We looked at the different components of the 400-meter training program. So we looked at speed development, lactic acid capacity work, and tolerance work. We talked about the theory of reversibility, which very simply means if you train something, you improve. If you don't train it, you lose it. We looked at some very fundamental energy systems and how all the energy systems work concurrently together, the anaerobic alactic system through to the aerobic system. We looked at some of the ingredients of success in 400 meters, and we talked about speed being the limiting factor. We looked at development of the 400 meters and how you develop the race. And then we looked a little bit about some of the key things of acceleration speed and maximal speed and stuff that we've covered in the previous presentations on speed development. But we specifically looked at the position of the blocks on the bend and the on your marks, the set and the go positions. Happy to take any questions, either on the presentation or 400-meter training in general. Quite happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Thanks, James. As they are preparing the questions, do you think this theory of reversibility, is that a reversible thing is gender specific? Is it different for boys and girls? Is it all same for all?
I don't honestly know the answer to that, actually. I think, you know, it in terms of, I mean, fundamentally it's the same for everybody. However, in terms of time frames, it will vary, you know, between boys, girls, and girls. So I think, you know, some athletes might lose their speed very quickly. Other athletes, it might take a bit longer to lose their speed. Age is also a factor here. So what you tend to find is younger athletes tend to take longer to lose their fitness and lose their speed. And older athletes tend to lose their speed and their fitness a little bit quicker. So that needs to be considered when you're looking at training and when you're deciding how long to have off as a rest period at the end of the year and things like that. Now, the thing with theory of reversibility is different things take longer to develop and lose. So the hardest thing to develop is technique. That's the longest thing to develop, but it's also the longest thing to regress or the longest thing to lose. So if you ingrain very good technique when you're young, even if you don't train it for a long period of time, it's unlikely you're going to lose it. It might need a bit of finessing, but you're not going to lose it. At the other end of the spectrum, flexibility is something that can be developed very, very quickly. And you can actually get some tangible flexibility gains in as little as 1 week. But you can also lose flexibility in 1 week also. Therefore, it's very important that flexibility is trained very, very regularly and consistently. Otherwise, the gains that you've got, you will lose. And so it's important to understand where all the elements lie on the, you know, based on the theory of reversibility.
Thanks, James. Nutan, are you able to unmute yourself now? Oh, I think he's not able to unmute himself. He has a question, James. He's asking how many days, suppose if I have a microcycle of 1 week microcycle, how many days in that microcycle I should be working on the endurance, special endurance, and lactic acid tolerance? for a 400-meter runner?
Again, I'm sorry, it's very hard to give a direct answer to these questions because it varies based on the age, experience, and the actual speed of the 400-meter athlete. As a rule of thumb, you probably want to be working speed once a week, speed endurance once a week, lactic acid tolerance once a week, and then perhaps some lactic acid capacity work once a week also, something like that. So maybe speed earlier in the week when you're fresh, speed endurance, depending on the time of the year. You want to start your speed endurance work about 12 weeks away from your first competition. Before that, you might be doing longer speed endurance. Lactic acid tolerance work would be things like 600s, 500s, stuff like that. And then lactic acid capacity work would be more like special endurance work, fast 300s and stuff. And you might do those once a week, once every 10 days. And again, it depends on the time of the year. So you want to be working on special endurance as you're coming into the season. So maybe at the start of the year, special endurance would be more like lactic tolerance. So it might be 3 600s at the start of the year. And by the end of the year, those 3 600s have evolved into something like 2 300s with a full recovery as fast as possible. This might be for an 18, 19-year-old athlete that's running maybe sub 50, something like that. If the athlete, this is for males, if you have an athlete perhaps running, let's say 55 to 6, as a male, it's 18 or 19, something like that, then they can actually do more. So they perhaps should be doing 3 300s, and the recovery would be less. It maybe would be 10 minutes in between, because the intensity is less. The athlete's not running as fast. So you have to factor all these things in, the intensity, of the athlete, stuff like that. Just remember the recovery time. So speed, it takes about 48 hours to recover from speed. So if the athlete is running at very high intensity, you need 48 hours to really fully recover from that. So as long as you remember that, so you wouldn't want to do a speed train on day 1, special endurance training on day 2, and speed endurance training on day 3. Because by the time you get to day 3, your nervous system is absolutely fried and you won't be able to run fast because you haven't recovered. So it would be better to do that. If you're going to do that, you do it on day 1, day 3, day 5. So you have a rest day in between. So yeah, there's quite a lot to consider. I'm very sorry, it's very hard to answer that question directly, but just consider, all the factors before making your decision on how often to do these type of training sessions. Special endurance, I certainly wouldn't recommend doing it more than once per week.
Okay. Nuthan, can you try unmuting yourself right now?
Yeah, I can
ask
unmute now.
a very far away question, I think.
And I have one more question. Why Indian athletes are achieving in 400 meters? If you take a history till now, like only the 400 meters athletes are achieving in an international level. Can I get answer why?
So why are Indian 400-meter athletes doing well?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think there's a bit of a focus on the 400 meters now in India. So, obviously Hima Das, is a very positive role model for Indian athletes. He set the bar high, winning the World Juniors a few years ago. So I think, and there's just a big focus on 400-meter running in India. Now, obviously, at the Olympic Games and stuff like that, you've got the mixed relay now, the 4x400 relays, male and female. So there's opportunities there for countries like India to make Olympic finals, actually. It's actually far easier to make a final in a relay than it is in the individual event. And of course, the relay requires 4 athletes all running at their very best, to do that. India did well at the Olympics, obviously broke the Asian record in the men's 4x400. That was great. Unfortunately, just didn't quite make the final, but very close to making the final. So I think there's been a big focus on it. The coaches are becoming, better. They're understanding the event better, and it's attracting the best athletes. So a lot of maybe 200-meter runners, are deciding, actually, I can't really be competitive at the 200, but what I can do is I can be competitive in the 4x400, and maybe I can win a medal at the Asian Games or something like this, Commonwealth Games. Therefore, I'm going to move to 400. So it's becoming a more attractive proposition for some of our sprinters, and perhaps even 800-meter runners dropping down also. There's an option for them as well. So yeah, I think it's very good, and I think it's only going to go on as well. And also, you've got 400-meter hurdlers, you see, that can run relays as well. 400-meter hurdlers tend to be very good 4x400-meter relay runners because they're very strong, and they're quite good in a bit of a battle, as well. So I know certainly on the men's side, a couple of those 400 hurdles guys have run quite well in the relays as well. So I think it's a whole combination of factors, to be honest. But let's hope that you guys, here keep improving, and yeah, I think in 3 years' time, let's hope you guys make an Olympic final in the relay. Let's hope so.
Thanks, James. Nathan, I think, does it answer your question?
Yeah, thanks a lot, sir.
Yeah, good question. Thanks.
Yeah. Our next one is Srijit Prashant. Srijit, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, sir. Sir, basically, what must be the height of the athlete or the hurdler so that he can participate in the international or the other competitions in hurdling, and can it increase the stamina also of that hurdler?
Okay. Is this for 400-meter hurdling? Is it, or?
He's basically
yes, 400.
minimum height requirement for a hurdler to be a hurdler.
Okay. So I mean, listen, there isn't a minimum height requirement. I mean, anyone can do it. It's certainly advantageous, particularly for the male athletes, to be a bit taller. Certainly in the sprint hurdles, because the hurdles are 106.7 centimeters high, which is, if you've ever stood next to a sprint hurdle, you realize, my goodness, this is pretty high. It looks a lot higher in person than on TV. So it helps if you've got long legs. Now, for the women, actually, it's disadvantageous to be too tall. Women sprint hurdlers should be short, because the hurdles are a lot lower, and the distance between the hurdles is not great. It's 8.5 meters. So the average step length is 1.8 meters for female hurdlers. Therefore, if the female hurdlers are too tall, the stride length becomes compromised and quite tricky. So for female hurdlers, sprint hurdlers, they actually don't need to be that tall. So male sprint hurdlers, it helps. Now, if we move to 400-meter hurdles, yes, it's helpful if a male hurdler is, let's say, 6 foot plus. It's definitely advantageous, because your hip height related to the height of the hurdle, will be closer. For women, again, it's not actually hugely important for the hurdling, because the hurdles are very low for women in the 400 hurdles. However, it is beneficial for the running bit. And we know from experience that, generally speaking, being taller can be an advantage in 400-meter running. Therefore, if you're taller, it can be advantageous because you take less strides, as you go around the track if you're taller. Because generally, if you're taller, you have a longer stride length. So it can be advantageous for women, not for the hurdling, but for the running in between. The second part of the question, I think, was, does it help with endurance? Not directly, but if you are taller and the hurdling is easier because your hip height is closer to the height of the hurdle, then you can be a little bit more efficient. Therefore, it's likely that the taller athletes will be stronger and finish stronger at the end of the race. If you watch the Olympic Games 110-meter hurdles for men, There's a guy called Hansel Parchment who won the race. He's a Jamaican guy, and he was the tallest athlete in the race. And at halfway, he was in about third or fourth place, I think. And what happened was the guy that was leading, Grant Holloway, who was the big favorite, he started tying up badly. And this Hansel Parchment guy just came flying through at the end because he was a taller athlete and he was more efficient than Holloway and some of the other athletes. Therefore, he came through stronger at the end. Not necessarily because he's better at speed endurance or has more speed endurance. It's because he's more efficient than the other guys because he's taller. He's got the benefits of being tall. However, he's never going to be winning a race at halfway because he's tall. He loses his advantage at the start of the race, but he will gain an advantage at the end of the race. And what you tend to find is indoors, the shorter athletes tend to do better than the taller athletes. A 60-meter indoors, you don't tend to have it here, but in Europe, we have 60-meter indoors and 60-meter hurdles indoors. And a lot of the shorter athletes do better at that. So I hope that explains the question. A bit of a long-winded answer, but I hope that answers your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, James. That was the last question for you, James. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Moving on to Nilesh. Over to Nilesh.
Yeah, hi. Hello, everyone. So I think this was a last week presentation, injury self-management. So it's a simple management process that we follow. It's a three-step management. So first is identify the location where you have the injury. You evaluate as you have been, if you recollect my presentation, the first most painful movement, second most painful movement, and the third most painful movement for your evaluation and re-evaluation after any exercise or any rehabilitation protocol. In management, basically, then you follow the acute management principle. That's a police protocol. So the P stands for protection, OL stands for optimum loading, I stands for ice, I stands for ice, C stands for compression and elevation, E stands for elevation. And once you through with that acute management, then you basically move on to volume-based isolation exercises. So volume-based isolation exercises basically single joint movement exercise or one muscle or single joint movement exercises. For example, you can say glutes or simple hamstring for the knee or quadriceps. Then once you are fine with this, your pain reduces further, then you move on to volume-based compound exercises. And this helps in getting into the intensity. So once you are comfortable with the volume-based exercises, you reevaluate again based on the first most, second most, and third most painful movement, and then you move on to the intensity-based exercises. And here, how you start with return to sprinting. You have a very good protocol given in the research article which was shared last in my presentation. So the return to sprinting, you can start, and once you are completely fine, you should involve some preventive measures in your warm-up and in your activations or potentiation that before the track session or before the gym session, so that you don't get these injuries again, or you don't get the same injuries again. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have related to my presentation.
Thanks, Nilesh. As they prepare the questions, here's a question from Rakesh Kumar. Rakesh, could you please unmute yourself? Rakesh,
I just want, thank you, Ajit.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know how to manage the IT band syndrome.
Okay.
Is it curable?
Yes, it is definitely curable. The reason that the IT pain syndrome starts is basically if you have a very weak glutes, basically the abductors, you can say the hip abductors. And if you start to run for a very long time, and if you continue with that, it creates a lot of pressure through the IT band, which can rub the bone, which is we call it as the fibula bone, basically fibula head. It was the outer side of the knee. That's where the swelling and the friction starts, and that's how the IT band syndrome occurs. Basically, that's the condition, the name of the condition. If you want to treat this, the best way is to include a lot of activation and strengthening exercise for the glutes, specifically for the middle distance and long distance runners. This is very helpful for them. So if you have a very good glute strength or a core strength, that will help you manage and also to prevent IT band syndrome. I hope that answers your question.
Rakesh, can you hear us?
Yeah. Thanks, Nilesh. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Rakesh. Yeah. Next question is from Nitya Sri Jayaraman. Nitya, can you please unmute yourself?
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir. Sir, my question is that we frequently, when we are running, we get muscle pains, and we use sprays like relief spray. So, won't it affect our muscles or our health?
So you mean to say you do the release spray? You basically apply the release spray. Does it affect your running?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so basically release spray, Dozal, you can, it's more of an evaporating spray, or you can just, it makes the area cooler. It's a similar, similar protocol that ice works basically, right? Because ice is not available full time or whenever we are running. So people try to spray, the release spray, basically it cools down the skin temperature. So once it's cooled down the skin temperature, you feel good. So we call it as a counter irritation mechanism. So basically similar to what we apply as, some of the balm, for the head, for the headaches. So it works on that principle.
So the continuous usage of those such sprays don't affect us?
No, it doesn't. It feels good definitely because it's a cooling effect. So in that sense, definitely it will help. But in terms of pain management or getting better from any injury, it doesn't help in a long term.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Nitya for asking the question. Yeah, next one is Nutan. Nutan, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, hello, sir. Like when we're doing a weight training, like how much weight we have to apply for the athletes? Like when we're doing a squats, we have to take their age or according to their body weight, we have to put a weight when we do like squats or cleans, hang something.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Actually, the best answer is it's a gradual progression, right? It's a simple term. That's a gradual progression you need to do. It also depends on, as James mentioned, that it depends on the training age and since how long that person is doing the training. So there is no straight answer for how much weight that person should be lifting in the gym or during the weight training. So it's always a gradual progression. You can definitely have a testing, like 1 repetition maximum testing, and depending on that, based on your the block cycle, like 4-week blocks, you can incorporate 80%, 90%, or 95% plus training principle based on how your the schedule is going. So that you can include in your training program. That's how it's gonna work. I hope that answers your question. Hello.
Nithan, can you hear us?
Yeah, sir. Sir, one more question.
Yes.
Like how to identify like whether they have strength in hamstring or glute muscle, like before getting an injury, like a prevention thing. Okay. How to identify that, and if the athlete got an injury, how to overcome from that? Because after getting the injury, they'll be keep thinking of that injury only. They won't. When we give a speed workout, they'll be thinking that we may get again hamstring injury, and how to overcome from that, sir?
Yes, that's an excellent question. First, I'll answer how to manage the injury. That the management is already given, like injury self-management, how you should manage that. In terms of testing the strength, the best way to test the strength is isolation exercises. So like, but with the isolation exercise, like you just ask the athlete to bend his knee and you do the manual resistance. You can. There are many other equipments that is available which gives the strength in poundage. So or in kilos, like 25 kilos, 30 kilos. So you can have some objective finding out of that equipment, and that you can keep it as a baseline and you can check it every 4 weeks. So that's how you'll understand, okay, this is how the strength is going, and this is, because of, this is how the strength is improving. Yeah, to for the injuries, basically how they are thinking, the thinking process and all, the best person that I would ask is Maithili, because she is going to be she's have expertise in that, because that's very important, because that fear avoidance, basically we call it as, and that's very important for a sports psychologist to get involved in the injury management, so that they have some mental conditioning criteria, some mental conditioning some schedule or any particular activities that helps in your rehabilitation management as well. So I'll have a sports psychologist as well with me who will basically deal with this fear avoidance techniques.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking the question. Next one is Srijit Prashant. Srijit, could you please unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yes, sir, if a person is having a bone problem and still he is running, then the outcome.
Yeah, I think your voice is cracking. Can you ask again, please?
So if a person is having a bone problem and still he is running the race, so what will be the outcome of it after the race or in between the race?
Well, bone problem is like very generalized. If you mean to say a kind of stress fracture or some stress reaction in the bone, then definitely it's gonna get worse if you don't manage it early. Right, so it's very important to manage the injury in an early phase rather than later phase, because once it becomes chronic, it's very difficult to deal with the injury, and at the same time getting back to their normal routine or return to play, as we say, getting back to the sport, it's going to be very hard over a period of whatever the months or years that pass by. I hope that answers you.
And one more is that if while running a person has a cramp,
okay,
then how should we reduce it, or how can we cure it?
Well, the cramps is a simple mechanism of dehydration. Okay, so if you are not hydrated enough, definitely there will be cramp. But even if you do get cramps, the residual pain, we say even after the cramp subsides, okay, the residual pain stays for at least 3 to 4 days, or 4 to 5 days. It may extend to 2 weeks as well. In that case, you need to make sure that your strength, your isolation exercises, and your compound exercises are getting better. And same way, you have to manage as if it's a it's like an acute strain of the muscle, or there is some injury to the muscle if it stays for a very long time.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another question, Nilesh. In your center in HPC, if an athlete is injured and he cannot train for next 1 month, that 1 month, what would you be doing actually? I mean, do you have any criteria-based rehab program? Would you be setting a criteria to bring him back to action? And can you please explain that process?
Yeah, so that's a good question actually. So what we do is, if this particular area, for example, the ankle is injured or knee is injured, so if it is very acute, we do not put any stresses on those joints, and we try to strengthen the other areas. For example, the hip is fine, hip is okay, so we can strengthen that. We can strengthen some isolation exercise for the other leg. We can do some core activities. We can do some core strength. We can do some upper body. So that should continue, because the ultimate thing is the load should not get reduced even if there is injury. It has to maintain at a particular level. That's very important. So I would not put the stress on that joint. Once the pain becomes better and it improves with the protocol, like injury management protocol, then definitely slowly and steadily I start putting the stresses on the joint to check whether the joint is strengthened enough to go for another stresses because of the sport or any jumping activities or runs basically. So that's how we do it. I
Thank
hope
you so
that
much.
the
Thank you so
question.
much. Yeah. And next question is from Peter. Peter, could you please unmute yourself and ask the question? Peter, can you hear us? I think there is some technical issue at his end. Yeah, he's basically asking for an athlete, what are the main? Yeah, I think he's unmuted, right? Peter, you can go ahead and ask the question.
Okay, hello, sir.
Hello.
Yeah, am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Okay, sir, I just want to ask some a question about this ankle and this knee injuries, or say like below the knee. I mean, behind the knees. The main reason for this footballer injury. So I just want to ask how and how to avoid, and then how to like say manage the injuries.
Okay, so you mean to say behind the knee injuries, right? Behind the knee.
Yes, sir.
So behind the knee, basically, when you have too much stresses on your hamstring and your hamstring is not strengthened enough, we call it as the distal part. If you recollect my presentation, the distal part of the hamstring, right? So that's basically the knee, basically behind the knee attachment. So if there are a lot of stresses on those hamstrings while kicking the ball or sprinting, definitely it gets reactive. The tendon gets reactive, and that's how the pain starts. So in that sense, in that cases, basically you need to continue from isolation to compound and intensity-based exercises. I would prefer for footballers, some of the eccentric-based exercises for the hamstring is found to be very efficient and effective. Even for the preventive and even for the rehabilitative, in rehabilitation as well. So eccentric loading or eccentric exercises are very important for the footballers for the hamstring injuries. I hope that answers your question, Peter.
I think he's not able to hear us now. Yeah, thanks, Lex. That was the last question. Due to time shortage, we have to close the session now. And unanswered question will be answered, and you'll be getting an answer in your inbox, and we'll be we'll be sending you the answer separately. Okay. Thank you, Nilesh.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maitli, James, and Nilesh, for hosting such a wonderful and informative session. I'm sure all of us have gained valuable knowledge from it. To all the participants, a very big thank you for attending this webinar series. We hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you back with us at our Athletics Advanced webinar series starting in last week of October 2021. Before you leave the session, we request to kindly fill out the feedback form that you'll be able to see at the end of the session. On behalf of the entire RFYS family, thank you once again. We hope you all have a great weekend ahead. Come on, India, let's play. Thank you.